Hi, beautiful souls. Yay. Okay. Hi. Good evening. How are you? Welcome. And for those of you that are only able to watch this later on, hi to you too. It's really nice that I really appreciate everybody that chimes in whenever you can chime in. I know this time doesn't work. It's a big world with many, many time zones. And so welcome, and I hope that you are well, or well enough, I should say, whenever you're able to view this video. So tonight I'm going to talk about the Suit of Swords and just about all of the energy around the suit. This topic tonight was prompted by one of the viewers. I'm not sure if it was one of the viewers of my lives, but she was a little concerned. Oh, I know when it was. So when I did the video on the collage decks, she was a little concerned about the Ten of Swords in the Enchanted Tarot. And so we had a bit of a discussion, and I decided that here we are at the end of the year and going through difficult times for a lot of people, and that maybe this might be quite apropos to talk about it. And also last week, if you were tuned in, it was Nena, I believe, who requested that we talk a little bit about ethics. And so I thought I would address that as well tonight. Ethics in as working as a tarot reader, or if you work in multiple modalities, then we can kind of address it from that angle as well too. So I've pulled a few different decks tonight to kind of work with on these topics. And I mentioned last week too that I would get a copy of the ethics that were listed in the reading room, where the store where I do readings sometimes. So I do readings lots of different places, markets, and at a metaphysical store in a town called Sechelt, British Columbia, and at my home, and online, and lots of different places. And anyway, in the store, this is where this list of ethics comes from. Hi, Laura Lee. Nice to see you there. And I've pulled in a few different resources, books, and guidebooks that I'm going to work with tonight. So I thought that I would start with, and you've heard me talk about Isabel's book before, Isabel Rado Kliegman. And this is a book I've had for a long time. I'll just get the copyright for you. It is first edition, 1997. So I know it's still in print because I did go to look for it. And if you are interested in kind of looking at different layers of the minors, so this book focuses on the tree of life, and it also brings in the chakra system as well too. So there's quite a few different layers that are very well written about. And of course, if you have background in the Kabbalah, then you're really gonna, enjoy this book. She says in the beginning, she's by no means an expert, but it's a wonderful kind of overview and another layer to add to this whole experience of reading tarot cards. So I thought I'd just read to you a little bit from this chapter on the swords. She says, the Suit of Swords is additionally important for people who are interested in tarot, because no matter how bright we are, no matter how intuitive we are, how perceptive and deeply feeling, if we haven't got the commitment to look at our own life intrepidly, we will never learn anything from the cards. And that makes so much sense to me, because I know so many readers who say that they cannot read for themselves. Hi, Apurva. Nice to see you. And so I think that is part of, and well, I'll just read on. She carries on. She says, it's amazing how many people come to me for a consultation after driving long distances just to find me. So this is FaceTime readings and that kind of stuff. They put in a lot of energy and happily pay for my fee, but really don't want to know. They think they want to know, but they really don't. What they truly want is to be supported in a belief system that is not serving them well. And I really understand this because often when difficult cards come up in a reading, it becomes more and more complex and more difficult, not only for the querent, but also for the reader herself. And so this really kind of plays into Nina's question, which was about ethics. And so, how do we approach? Hi, Sadhana. Sorry, hi, Sadhana. Oh my God. Hi, Nina. You said hi, Sadhana. So, I think this is a really, really kind of a good segue to this. And I'm just going to carry on. I've just marked a couple other things here. She says, when we start to read professionally, we must be clear on our purpose. And I think that is really important, and because that's going to clarify the approach, as well as the kind of feelings you're getting from lots of different readers. We do not, we do not read to be brilliant. We read to be helpful. It is sometimes less valuable to convey everything. I'm going to say that again. It is sometimes less valuable to convey everything we see than to communicate what needs to be understood in a way that can be heard. I'm going to say that again. This is really good. It is sometimes less valuable to convey everything we see than to communicate what needs to be understood in a way that can be heard. Right? So I think that goes with every kind of healing modality. And we really need to kind of meet the person exactly where they're at. And that is a skill that takes lots and lots of time. So I think when you run into readers that are not meeting you where you're at, that's when you start to feel kind of weird about the reading, right? They're not, don't have quite enough experience, or there's just something not going there. And so you are not feeling met. So you feel perhaps, something's not going on quite right. So from the code of ethics that I copied from, well, I took a photo of, the very first thing is place our clients' needs first and foremost with the intention of providing an opportunity for independent healing and or personal empowerment, and with no intention to harm. So that is kind of really important, because instead of barreling into a reading, it's really important to try to step back. You're welcome, Nina, to step back and really kind of feel or ask why are they really here? And I find that sometimes I need to ask that question multiple times. You might ask them, like, do they have a question, and then they can't come up with a question. But that's why I go through the guided meditation. That's why I get them to sit. And I do this even if they're on the telephone, or if I'm doing, any kind of reading. I go through this guided meditation to help them ground and to really find their focus. And then, because I'm quite empathic, I do pick up on their energy, and that's just makes such a difference in the reading. But even if you aren't empathic, or you doubt your ability to kind of connect with your querent energetically, I think that's something you just need to practice over time and really come into a place of trust. So the client is definitely number one. The second one is to demonstrate respect by honoring a client's process, being present, listening, and asking only pertinent questions. So what that means is when you're doing a reading, is to watch, That's kind of just like the first thing, right? You're not doing this blindly. You're watching their body language or you're listening to their breath. So if you're on the telephone or you're doing a FaceTime reading, you know, listening to the rate of respiration, I find a lot of people start to breathe a lot faster, or you can feel that anxiety rising. And so I think they're coming to this because at some level, they want to heal. They want to work through something energetically. So part of your job as a reader is to help calm them down, and just maybe you take a breath, you slow your breath down, and then you really kind of choose the important parts of the reading that you need to cover. And you can ask them, right? Because sometimes they're not ready, just like Isabel said in her book, they're not ready to hear what they need to hear. So you go in carefully and explore that layer by layer. Next one is to maintain a standard of professional conduct, maintain confidentiality of information concerning clients, and refrain from discussing client care details. Was kind of a no-brainer. I know sometimes we do need to refer to other readings and it can be really helpful. So I know lots of times where I've read for, and I've mentioned this to you before, right? So I've read for a mother and a daughter, and when the second person has come in, they pull exactly the same cards, but from a different deck or something like that. And so on some level, it's important to share that, I feel, because there's this connection that they need to understand, because maybe the mother and daughter are not feeling or seeing that connection. And that's also going to come up in the reading. And so to me, that's not breaking client confidentiality, but there's just a level of compassion and caring. And the message for the mom and daughter might not have been exactly the same, because every card doesn't deliver the same message, right? There's always these subtle differences. And so, but that doesn't mean after I'm done a reading, I'm going to go out into the store and talk about it with the girl who's working behind the cash. But if perhaps there was a lesson in that reading that was mirrored back to me, and don't you find that happens all the time? You'll be doing a reading, and what's coming up in the reading is something also that you need to hear today. And so perhaps, you can talk about a core message or something, but you leave all out the private, confidential stuff. Provide a safe, comfortable, and private and clean environment. So, of course, if you're not in contact with the person, that's not really relevant. But I think all of that is like that level of safety and comfort. That's why one of the reasons why I do the meditation, right? I think foremost it's so they can land, right? And feel comfortable. And then I watch them. Do they need to take off their jacket? Do they need to put on a jacket? Do they need another layer? Do they need a blanket? Because some people have, the anxiety begins to rise so much, they need to wrap up, because they're afraid of what's going to be revealed. And maybe they are brave enough, which we're going to talk about tonight with the swords, but it can be really, really unnerving. We have a lot of different practitioners work here. So some of these don't really apply to doing like tarot readings. Be honest in all endeavors. And I think one thing there is, if you don't know, you say you don't know, right? And if you're not picking up on something, you say you're not picking up on something. And we touched on that last week when I said, if I am feeling either like they have created a block, or I'm not feeling well, then to give yourself permission just to end the reading and invite them back another time or something like that. And you can offer them a little perk for coming back again later. There's lots of ways to do that. So being honest in all endeavors, charge a fair and published price for your services. And that's immensely huge. So I don't do free readings most of the time. So if I'm doing a reading for a friend, we always exchange $1. And sometimes they have something else that they can give to me in contra, but I never do a reading, for free, unless I'm giving it away, as a gift, like I did with the 1,000 subscribers. Oh, and I need to talk about that in a minute. If you have any policies or credentials, that's something that you can put on your website. You can put it on your wall if you have a reading room. Undergo occasional peer review or client evaluation, and I think that is really, really important. I that and that can also be quite intimidating, right? To have another reader evaluate you, but I think it's tremendously beneficial to do that. So that's something that's really important. And yeah, and the last one is promise to be aware of and abide by all national and local laws. I don't know if that applies to tarot, if tarot is illegal in some places. There are different kinds of, and perhaps touching, right? So I'm also a Reiki practitioner, so I do a lot of touching of clients, especially if I'm doing a reading and then a Reiki treatment, or if somebody is going through a lot of grief, maybe their spouse has just died or something like that has gone on, and so I do touch. If I feel appropriate, I sometimes hold hands, and sometimes I find if the person across the table isn't communicating, isn't connecting with me, and I can feel that kind of barrier, then I will. And sometimes near the end of the reading too, I will ask if it's okay if I hold their hands or I place my hands on their hands. And that is, for some people, that's all they need. A lot of people just actually need to be touched, and so you need to make sure that that's okay. I don't really know if that's a legal issue, but that's something there. So after I received this, I went to the internet and I Googled ethics for holistic practitioners. And there is a national association in Canada and an association in the US. And on the website for the Canadian Association of Holistic Practitioners, there is this incredibly long, very amazing document, which you might like to go to. And I think what I'll do, I should have had it ready to paste into the chat here, but I will maybe paste it into a comment below. I'm just going to make a note here. Um, yeah, but I would, if you are looking for something to put on your website, or if you're looking for something to put on your wall, if you do have a reading room, that was a really good resource for me. Canadian Association of Holistic Practitioners. Now, I do not have anything on my website, and I've never had an issue with anybody questioning my credentials or my authenticity. The only time it's happened when I was working actually at a store, and it's happened on two different occasions, and usually it's just because the person is so shut down, and they thought it's kind of just like what Isabel said, right? They thought they think they want to know, but they really don't. They're not ready. And there's one other thing that I just want to kind of, where was she at here? This is really good. A reader can provide the insight, the intuition, and the perception, but only the querent can provide the courage. So this is from the introduction to the Suit of Swords. And I think that is just a really beautiful segue into the Suit of Swords. There are so many layers that I'm going to talk about and kind of unpeel tonight. But to really learn from and understand and to embrace the Suit of Swords, we do need to be courageous. And I want you to think about all of those cards and those images, like the Knights of Swords, or even from a movie or a TV series like Merlin or something, and just think about those knights, holding and wielding a sword, right? There's so much that can happen from being on the wrong end of a sword. They're so dangerous. Sometimes they're magical, but the sheer valor, the sheer courage it takes to wield a sword, I think that's a layer that we always need to kind of keep under the surface and be aware of. And I think as readers, as yogis, as people who are exploring their spirituality, we have that courage, most of the time. And sure, we all fall into darkness from time to time, but there is a light that is represented by the sword as well, too. And that sense of courage, if it's not there and swords come up in a reading, then it's going to be really, really sticky and really, really difficult. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. And I would love to have, if you have any comments and stuff. I've got my laptop up quite high here, so I should be able to see your comments tonight. Oh, I want to go back. So before we go on, the draw. So I did the draw yesterday for the 1,000 sub. And this is also might be interesting to some of you. So both of the people who won the decks, they messaged me right away. And so I have mailed off the decks. But the person who won the reading has not. So I'm going to wait, I don't know, a week, maybe a couple of weeks. And if I don't hear from her, then, and it was Melanie P, by the way, who I haven't seen in the chat. But I'm going to keep an eye out and maybe go through some of her, see if she has commented before on anything. And if I don't hear back from Melanie P, then I will redraw for the complimentary reading. And I wanted to share with you. So I know there's lots of comments on the tarot card Facebook pages and stuff like that about the price of postage and how much it costs if you are perhaps in the UK and you're receiving a deck from Australia, or if you're in Australia and you're trying to get a deck from France or something, right? So the cost of postage is astronomical. And the 2 decks I gave away were in big boxes. And so I packaged them up as compactly as I could. And so I mailed one to the US and one to India. And when I got to the post office, it was like I couldn't believe how much it cost to mail the deck to India. And I had to decide whether I was going to send it surface, right, by ship with a tracking number, or by air with no tracking number, which was about the same cost. And anyway, I sent it by air with no tracking number. And, but yeah, wow. So next time I give something away, I'm going to make sure I give away a deck that's in a little box, not a big box. And I'm really happy. I'm so happy to share and give away these things, but it's just kind of like a reality check when you go to the post office and it's like, how much do you want for this? Anyway, lesson to self. So let's get back to the swords. And so I was talking about the knight on the horse, and just that image, right, of the gallant and brave knight, and just thinking about the sword. And I know swords are used in history and in our culture by people other than knights. But thinking about all that represents. So you can think about a queen of swords. You can think about a page of swords. You can think about one of my favorite page of swords is in the Queen Alice Tarot, and Alice has the sword and she's slaying the Jabberwocky, which is a really beautiful kind of metaphor. I've talked about this before, but in a nutshell, the Jabberwocky is a very difficult poem to read because the language is all created by the author himself. And so when you kind of look at that, slaying the Jabberwocky is, on one level, it's about actually physically killing a beast. But in this case, the beast is the poem, the beast is the language, the beast is the words. So I could really see that card coming up for somebody who was doing like a presentation, or going to, like going to a conference and actually speaking in public, or maybe, delivering something by voice for the first time with a lack of an experience, right? So, yeah, what does it mean to slay your Jabberwocky? So that's really kind of a cool, yeah, I love that poem. At one point, I actually had it memorized. So just think about what that sword represents, right? So it represents bravery and courage, gallantry. It also signifies, well, it's a weapon. Okay, so weapons they can cut, they can cause pain, they can cause destruction. But on the other hand, we have metaphorically the sword cuts through illusion, right? It cuts through the bullshit. It cuts straight to the chase and gets us to the core of the issue. And that kind of circles back around to what I said before, and that is, this is a really challenging suit. And so if the querent doesn't want to hear the truth, then it's going to be a really difficult reading. And those cards are going to be really, really hard to see, very, very hard to face. And I'm just going to show you the card. So this is one of the decks that I shared when I did the collage video. It's not a deck I use very often. Super large cards, really beautiful. And this is, and we'll circle around and come back to this. This is the Ten of Swords. So it's a mother holding a child. We have lightning and 10 swords. Right? So pretty darn dramatic. So I want you to keep that image kind of in the back of your mind, because I will come back to that. So what happens when the cards on the table are so shocking and the querent, or even you, are not quite ready to see the truth? Lots of different writers talk about, what is the truth and what does it mean to accept the truth? And I think kind of even before that, we have to consider that if we think we're seeking the truth, if we're ready to seek the truth, we need to be ready to be in the experience of whatever that means, however painful that is. What do we need to experience to get to the truth? And that's what the Suit of Swords is about. It's about what we need to go through to get to the truth. And that it might not be the truth, but it's your truth in this lifetime, in this particular situation, for this experience that you need to see, most likely to kind of step out of your patterns and move forward. How is truth conveyed? And I think this is why we think of the swords as communication and voice and speech and that kind of stuff. So I want you to think about religious texts, things that you read on the internet. A lot of us just go straight to Wikipedia and we think that is the truth. The news. A lot of people take the news at face value, and whatever appears in the news is the truth. I wrote down here, Dear John letter, right? A Dear John letter might be somebody's truth. So truth is a big word, and it's going to vary on the situation and whatever it is that the querent is going through. I think at first, the truth almost always hurts, or it's going to upset you. And one of the things that I say over and over again to clients is that when somebody says something to upset you, or I talked about this too in another video, try to remember what I said, or when a card really upsets you to the point where it's like, oh my God, I'm not going to buy that deck. That's a horrible card. That's when I believe that you really need to dig deep into that truth and to feel in your body, where does that hurt? Where does that upset you? Is your hair standing on end? Do you feel it in your gut? Do you feel it in your heart? What is it about that is upsetting you so much? Because I really think the more riled up you get, the more upset you are, the more this is affecting you, the more this is a really big lesson for you. And if we are brave enough to navigate it, then we will learn from it, right? Big, big, big stuff. So I think almost always the truth is likely to hurt or upset. And then if you're able and willing and ready, it may set you free, right? You've heard that so many times. The truth will set you free. And that is what happens after the Ten of Swords. That's what happens when we allow ourselves to get to that Ten of Swords point, to totally be broken down. And then it's like a breath of fresh air follows that Ten of Swords. But there's so much more. I have lots and lots written here. So I also want to say that everything I say, I am not an expert. By no means. I am a lover of the tarot. I have read and studied lots of different disciplines, but I am a student more than anything else. And I really want to carry on this discussion. And like the most important thing is that from this discussion tonight, you take away what makes sense to you, and then you leave the rest. Okay, that's kind of really important. So let's go on to the element. And the element of air is usually associated with swords. And when we're looking at the difficult cards of the swords, we need to kind of bring in the element of air and the qualities of air and see how, we don't need to. You can read a card at face value and just read it as a storybook, which works perfectly well. But if you want to bring in the elements, then think about the quality of air. And air is, we can't touch it. We usually can't feel it or see it. And it is the element that is most closely associated with ether. And that in itself makes this suit really, like I said, there's so much going on in the suit of swords. And being associated with ether means we're talking about, spirit, and we're talking about universal messages and things like that. So the quality of air. So we have wind, right? So we can definitely feel wind. We can feel it on our skin. Sometimes it is warm and soothing, like a summer breeze. And sometimes it is ice cold and it feels biting. Sometimes it can pick up things, like pick up sand, and it can actually physically hurt us. So air has lots of different qualities. And if air is fueled by fire, it can be very, very destructive. If it's fueled by, or if it's picking up, like I said, sand or other elements of the earth, or think about a tornado when it's actually picking up physical objects, it can be, really, really destructive. And at the same time, air can be very peaceful. It can just feel very, very calming and lovely, like when the weather is perfect. We also have the concept of breath associated with swords and all that breath represents. And that is, again, another huge, huge topic that I could go on about, but just think about that. Yeah, the whole idea of breath, the breath of life, and what's associated actually with breathing. And I'm going to tie this into the heart in a little bit. Um, just as air constantly moves, so does the mind. So this suit is most frequently associated with thought, not only communication, but also thought and the mind. And when you sit down and you try to quiet the mind, how busy and active the mind is, just like, air is always moving and always in action. Air is also usually associated with being ungrounded. And being ungrounded, I'm going to go, so Ayurvedically speaking, so air is associated mostly with the vata dosha. And so we have this tendency to speak really quickly. It's also associated with people that are highly intellectual. They're usually very thin and light in body, and just not connected deeply to the earth. So when we have an abundance of sword cards, when we have a lot of air in a tarot reading, the medicine is going to be to come down and to land and all of that. I'm just going to have a look and see what Nina said here. You just reminded me of Murakami's very powerful sandstorm. Do you know it? Murakami's, I don't know it. I think the Ten of Swords can be likened to his metaphor. I'll look that up. Thank you. So yeah, it's a really, I think this is one of the reasons this suit is one of the most difficult, because of all these layers, right? So we have thought, we have communication, we have voice, we have, thank you, we have the whole aspect of bravery and the willingness to navigate it. We have issues surrounding the truth and whether or not people are ready to face the truth. And, okay. So I said, if there's a lot of swords and if the reading is really difficult, the antidote is to ground. And so the other things that come with that are just to really, because sometimes I think in a reading, when there is a definite imbalance and there's a lot of difficult cards, your job as the reader is to point out that imbalance and to bring into the querent's awareness, how to achieve that. I mean, that's really important. It's not just about delivering the bad news. At least that's what I do as a reader. And also, because they're going through this experience, it's really important to allow them to be in the experience. And so often what happens is this becomes really, really melodramatic. The Ten of Swords is like all of the qualities of swords on steroids. It is like the most, oh, I wish I had well, okay, a lot of the Ten of Swords, the drama is just like, it's a saturation of all of the qualities of the swords. It's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't take 10 swords to kill somebody. The Ten of Swords is not about death. It's not about violence. It has nothing to do with that. It's about you have reached the pinnacle of this suit and you haven't, what I want to say. I had such a good thought in my head. I'm just going to pause. So you have all of this drama going on, and you get into this perception, this time of, it can feel like victim mentality. It can feel like melodrama. Oh, poor me. Oh, poor me. And I think that's because you're not seeing the big picture. The querent is not seeing the big picture. So part of the job of the reader is to help the client see the big picture. And hopefully, in the spread that you're doing, we've got some big picture cards that are going to help with that. If that's not something that comes to you naturally or something that you're trained in. Okay. So if the Ten of Swords is not about death and it's not about violence, what is it about? And I guess that's the big question, right? So we know that tens are about endings, right? They're either about the they're either about the fullness and the abundance and the beauty of the suit, or they are about just the saturation. So the wands and the swords are about that. Just I think saturation is a really good word of the suit. It's just too much. It's just too much. There's been, and it depends on the situation. You can't always say it's been too much thinking. It can be too much of anything that, I've already mentioned tonight. So yeah, so it's about those things. It's also about a sense of hopelessness, which is another way of looking at the same thing. But then there's this glimmer, and in most Ten of Swords cards, there is a light, or there's a change in the weather, or there's something in the background that suggests there this is not all there is, right? And I think the biggest lesson of the 10, one of them anyway, is letting go. Letting go of expectations, letting go of all of those things that you built up. There's a really hi. Sorry, I have to put my glasses on to see the chat. Hi, Brianne. Nice to have you here. I don't know how many of you know Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi. It's quite a challenging book to get through if you can't kind of roll all the Indian place names and all the Sanskrit off your tongue. It's a book that you need to read a few times. But there's this wonderful part in the book where he is at a conference and he's with a bunch of intellectuals, and they are just so adamant that they know the way something is because of the research, because of what they've studied, because of the experiences that they've had in their academic education. And so what he carries on with in his talk to these academics is the discussion of the difference between the book knowledge and the academia. So getting all of that information from the outside as opposed to getting the information from the inside. I need to check my time. Okay. So that is a topic that comes up a lot as you are kind of ready to progress through a lot of these challenging sword cards. So, and that's coming into a place of trust. That's coming into the letting go of so many things. The letting go of always being right. So that's a very kind of a shadow side of the King of Swords. Always being right, never apologizing, always, it's, those people who always have an answer, even if they know nothing about the topic, right? It's about letting go of that. And those can be really, really big lessons for people who are really heavy into to sword energy. Some of you will recognize this deck. This is the Osho Zen Tarot. And so been a while since I read this guidebook, but let me just, so this is the 10 of Swords or the 10 of Clouds and the Osho Zen. So the camel is the lowest form here, and then there's the lion, and then the child. And I did pull out the guidebook and mark the page, so I'm just going to read one thing from here. This is the extra guidebook. It's not the one that comes with the cards. And there's, I've mentioned this deck before, there's a lot of good stuff in the guidebook that comes with the cards, but in this one, it's very Osho, shall we say. So he says, the camel is the lowest conscious, so the camel is the lowest. The lowest consciousness in man is crippled. It wants to be enslaved. So think about that in terms of the academia, the intellectuals, right? They are enslaved in their research. They're enslaved in their book knowledge. It is afraid of freedom because it is afraid of responsibility. It is ready to be loaded with as much burden as possible. It is ready, the camel is ready to be loaded with as much burden as possible. I hope you think this is as cool as I am. Okay, just a minute. I've lost my place. It rejoices in being loaded. So does the lowest consciousness, being loaded with knowledge, which is borrowed. This is what made me think of the Yogananda thing. No man of dignity will allow himself to be loaded with borrowed knowledge. It is loaded with morality that has been handed over by the dead to the living. It is a domination of the dead over the living. No man with dignity will allow the dead to rule him. And so I think one of the sparks of light that is in the background of the, and then in that card, the lion is that next step, which represents the freedom. And then the child represents innocence, which is the purity. Oh, now I lost my thought again. What was I saying? Okay, so I'm sure you kind of got that. Oh, the glimmer in the background. So that glimmer in the background could be the step of the freedom, which can be really, really scary. So the freedom is about letting go of something. We have to unpack, and then we can step forward and begin to experience freedom. But for a lot of people, freedom is really, really scary. And so, we kind of get that mood with this whole suit. I wish I could think of the deck, but I'm reminded of a 10 of Swords card where the character has done the murder himself, then walks away wounded, but having created his own culmination, right? And so that's it. We've done this to ourselves. It hasn't been done to us, right? We have created this situation. And so now the question is, do you understand that you've created this situation or not? And if you don't, then you kind of need to go in a different direction with the reading. But if they do understand that they've created this situation, then, great things can go forward. Yes, it's so heavy. It's so heavy. But all this is about letting go of expectations, letting go of preconceived ideas. It's about being open. It's about trusting more, right? And just allowing life to be what it needs to be for you. I have the Gaian Tarot here somewhere too, because a lot of people have a really hard time with letting go. And Joanna Powell Colbert in this deck has Canada geese flying south for the winter. So this is a 10 of air in the Gaian Tarot. And So this is a flock of geese who are so it's the end of the fall and they're heading south for the winter. And so this is about the shift in the seasons. This is about allowing being okay with the change. And I was thinking about the relationship between the 10 of swords and between the wheel because of course this is a 10 card, right? And when we get to all of the tens, we really need to kind of bring that into mind. So I think if you were doing a reading and you've got the 10 of wands or you've got the 10 of swords and maybe some other challenging cards in the reading, it might not be a bad idea if the wheel has not come up in the reading to go through your deck and to pull out that card and just have a little chit chat about the wheel, right? About being okay with being at the bottom and knowing that the wheel is always turning and that you will be on the top and be okay and be happy about being on the top, but you don't need to be boastful. You don't need to be. Oh, it's all this stuff is really heavy. So yeah, so I don't know if it's too much for this, but it's just something to think about, right? We need to be okay with being low, and we need to be okay with being high. And we need to know that both are great and they're both wonderful places to be. And sometimes there's nothing we can do about being on any point of the wheel. We just need to be exactly where we are and be okay with being exactly where we are. And I think that the problem with the 10 of swords being drawn as a human with a bunch of swords in their chest or their back or their whole body is that it makes us think that it's about violence, it's about murder, it's about death. And I think in the aspect of death as an ending, it's about that, but it's about so much more than that. Yeah, this too shall pass. So, what do you think about that? It's a lot, hey? It's a lot. And so that the card with the mother and the child is a horrific card. It's horrible. So I'm looking for something here and I will find it. So how does that kind of fit into, everything that I've been saying? And I think I have it here. There's kind of one line I was going to read to you from the guidebook. So when an artist decides to draw the 10 of swords like this, she says, oh, that's the line. She says, let go and let God. And I'm sure you've all heard that before. And the idea of letting go again is super scary. That's the whole kind of theme of the suit of swords. The suit of swords is just really, really scary. So I want to tonight just kind of wind up with my deck. And Celia Melville, I love you. I love you for creating this deck. This deck has been just so extraordinary for me. I've had so many profound things come out of this deck. I can't tell you. This is a lily white, if you don't know what I'm talking about. I also have the lily black. And once in a while, I do take a few cards out of the lily black and I put them in here and I mix the two decks. Yeah. Sorry, I was just reading Nena's comment. So, okay, so I'm looking for the 9 and 10 of swords. Oh, and here's the wheel in this deck. Isn't that gorgeous? Look at that. You've got the sun, the moon phases, all the different seasons. And I know a lot of decks picture the wheel this way. And another favorite wheel card of mine is in the Anna Kay. I think it's hilarious. She's actually got people falling on the on the downside. She's actually got people falling off the wheel. It's really something. So yeah. Okay. So the 10 of Swords is the head of an eagle with a bunch of swords pierced through it. And I don't know why I can't find it. There it is. Okay. All right. So another thing to remember is that the ace of the suit is the potential, the pure potential of the suit. So think about your favorite ace of swords and think about all of the potential that lies within that sword. And then if we don't hang on to the truth, or we don't remain courageous, or we don't, we tend to wander and get lost in all these weird directions, that's when all these really difficult lessons come in. I think they're going to come in anyway when you're ready, but just think about that pure potential of the ace. And then in the 10, we have kind of been on this really, really windy path through all this horrible stuff. And instead of cutting to the chase, we decided and we chose to take all these detours to learn all of these lessons, right? Which is really kind of different from this ace and this 10. So here's the Ace of Pentacles in this deck, right? So the pure potential of the plant. And then here's the culmination, right? This beautiful plant of pentacles. So while the cups and the pentacles have this beautiful culmination, the swords and the wands have this really kind of challenging culmination. It's too much. And there are a few decks that also in the cups and the pentacles really deal with this, the shadow side of the cups and the pentacles, the saturation, right? Too much emotion, too much saccharin. And you'll see that in a few decks too. And I think that's really important when, you need to be aware of that. We all need to keep in the back of our mind that there is a shadow and there is a lighter side to every single card in the tarot. So I just wanted to show you this one. So this is the 9 of Swords, just kind of floating over the head of the eagle, right? And he still looks quite strong. So there's a lot on his mind. None of those swords have pierced the eagle. And then this is the 10. And there's so much in this card. So the brown sword in the background is piercing through the crown chakra or the fontanelle or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what you call it in an adult or in a skull. And the sword that is bent has actually cut through the bone, right? And fractured off some of the bone. And it's bent. Okay. And oh my God, it's almost an hour and I haven't even dealt with the heart chakra. Okay. So I just wanted to show this. So on the sword that's bent, can you see that element of earth sign? And on the brown sword, we have the cup. And I have the guidebook. It's in French. And so sometimes I read a line or two of it because it's so much work for me. I need to get me a French boyfriend so he can he can sit with me and read the guidebook. But if you turn it upside down, like you would hold a sword up, then we have the bent sword as the element of air and the brown sword is the element of fire. So this is a really cool Really cool Ten of Swords. So much potential conversation. And so that's what I want to say about these cards, circling right back to where we started. If a card upsets you, rather than saying, oh, yeah, I'm not going to buy that deck, I would never use that deck. I really encourage you to explore what it is about that card that is getting your goat. What is getting you all ruffled up. So I think tonight I'm just going to tie, because I wanted to tie in the element of air with the heart. And I won't talk for long. I'm trying to keep these chats down to an hour. So in the chakras, okay, so in the chakras, the element of earth is connected to the root, to the Muladhara chakra. The element of water, the second chakra, is connected to the Swadhisthana. And the solar plexus, the Manipura chakra, is the element of fire. And then when you get to the heart space, we have the element of air. And then the throat is the Vishuddhi chakra, is the element of ether. And then the Agnya chakra, the third eye, is all of the elements together. So if you are interested in this, and if you have a little bit of yogic background and you want to contemplate this, it is really cool, because this is the element of air, not water. Okay? This is not where the cups are. This is where the element of air is. And in the yogic practice, when we start to study about mind has three components. It talks about the kind of the general knowledge, as opposed to the wisdom, and also the ego. Ego is involved in that. And then we have that other layer of, cellular memory, and the mind being in every single cell. So there's that whole piece. And then we have this other piece connecting the teachings of the chakras, right? So the element of air sits here. And so I want you to think about the Three of Swords. And for the most part, most deck creators don't get too creative in this card. It's always a freaking heart or something very similar to that. And so when you think about the pain that is inflicted throughout this journey of the swords, it's really about the disconnect of the heart and the mind. And so earlier on, I talked about the importance of grounding and the importance of bringing in the element of earth and the balance. But this, the element of allowing yourself to feel, of compassion, of gratitude, of all those things, is as equally important. And you may have got to the lowest of your lows in the Ten of Swords because you forgot to feel, or you don't know how to feel. And that Three of Swords, I find, is often about, people say, nobody's died. I haven't lost anything, I got divorced 5 years ago. My mother died 2 years ago. Like people think that they've processed this stuff. They think they've actually dealt with it. And that's because intellectually they may have been through their grief. Intellectually, they may have thought they had let go, but they haven't. And so I think sometimes when these challenging tarot readings come up, it's a reminder that we need to go back here. We need to go back to the heart, and we need to go back to feeling, and we need to go back to breathing, right? So this part of the body also represents the breath. And that, as we said very early on, is another piece, another layer of these swords. So when you get a really challenging reading with a lot of swords cards, how do you know whether you're going to talk about the heart How do you know whether you're going to talk about expectations, or, how do you know which direction to go when you have a suit that is so full of beautiful teachings? And it's just fascinating. And as a reader, so I've told you my process before. So I do a body scan. I take them through a guided meditation. And while I'm doing that, I pick up things. I'm trying to think what the word is. Clairsentiently, I suppose, is one way to think about it. So energetically, I feel what they're feeling in my body. And so that is one of my segues into understanding the challenges that are coming up with the cards on the table. But there's different ways for you to know which way to go. And as a reader, you really need to trust your intuition, and you need to trust. You also need to be brave. I think if you feel a question needs to be asked, and sometimes when a question arises from you as the reader, what you need to remember is that this probably isn't coming from your ego. It's probably a download. It's probably spirit. It's probably, something that's coming from a higher place that is prompting you to ask the question. I mean, how many times in a reading have you said to yourself after the fact, like, oh my God, where did that come from? I've never said that before. That's not something I normally would have said. How could I have said that? And that's the trust that needs to come through, and you need to really allow yourself to, when something comes, especially if it comes out of left field really quickly. People say that, okay, now let me think. When I'm reading, it's so fast. I used to know this, like right side, left side. I think so. If it's coming from the past, so if it's coming from a loved one, I believe it's going to come. You're going to feel it on your right side. It's going to come through the right side. If it's coming from something else, it's going to come in from the left side. I don't think that matters too much. But my point is that you need to understand that if you are afraid as a reader to prompt or to ask a question, then you just need to practice more. And eventually you'll feel a heck of a lot more comfortable in asking, and dealing with these difficult readings, difficult cards, difficult situations. So as always, I feel like I've gone all over the place, and don't know if I've been of any help or any service, but I think it's all really kind of good food for thought. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for joining me tonight, and let me know. Let me know what you think, because let me know what you feel. Let me know of any difficult experiences or difficult 3, 9, 10 of swords cards that you just can't wrap your head around, because I'm happy to carry this discussion on. So next week is Boxing Day in Canada, and I'm going to have all my kids here. Some of them will have, I think one of them will be leaving, and I just need to decide what it is I'm going to do. So I'm not sure if I'll be live next Wednesday, but if I'm not going to be live, I'm going to, what's the word? You upload a video and then you say exactly what time it's going to come on. So I will upload a video for 7:00 on Wednesday night next week if I'm not going to be live, and I'll let you all know about that. So yeah, there's a few things coming on down here. You are very, very welcome. Shakti Veda says she agrees about the right and left ears. And I have done courses in mediumship, and this is another piece too. If you are in this field and you study crystals, you study shamanism, you study tarot, you study runes, you go to mediumship workshops, like sometimes it's too much. It's all too much. And right, you're learning how to read tea leaves and you're learning how to read palms and everything. I think it's better to pick 1 or 2 or 3 and to really kind of integrate it and do it well. And integrating all these things takes years and years and years of practice. So I think at first, if you start dipping your hand in lots of different pots, that's good because then you can figure out which ones are going to work for you, which ones really resonate. But over time, I think it's good to just kind of pare it down. And the piece that I have really let go of is mediumship. I, yeah, I hear things, I see things all the time, but it's not the focus of my readings in any way. Yeah. Oh, and tea leaf readings was something else I let go of. Um, I'm a fan of Outlander. I love Outlander. I've watched all of the episodes. I can't tell you how many times, multiple times. And I'm a fan of the TV series. I have not read the books. Actually, I've read the first book. Um, and that scene, that tea leaf reading scene in the first season, just really, really got to me. And I just love the energy and the beauty and the communion, in that scene. And so that prompted me to kind of investigate that, but I've let that go. So, oh, you're so lucky, Bran. Your nanny did tea leaves. Yeah, really, really fun. So I'm going to say goodnight, and I want to wish you all the best and to look after yourselves and to give yourself enough private time and nourishment over the holidays. And I will perhaps see you next week, or for sure, I will see you in 2 weeks' time. So stay well. Namaste.